Thank you,
North
Mr.
Dakota
President.
to South Dakota.
I know it's very confusing, and I very much appreciate my colleague from North Dakota yielding to his colleague from the South. I had hoped to come down here to ask unanimous consent to call up and pass Senate Bill 1956 with a committee-reported amendment. My understanding is there is an objection on the other side. I'm disappointed about that. I'd hope that we'd be able to get unanimous consent today to pass what is a very bipartisan bill. It's the European Union Emission Trading Scheme Prohibition Act. It's a bill that passed by voice vote just last week, this week I should say, earlier this week from the Commerce Committee, and a similar measure was passed earlier this year in the House of Representatives by a voice vote. The aviation industry, the administration, consumers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, just about everyone believes that the EU must be reined in and it must happen quickly. In fact, just this week at the Commerce Committee markup, Senator Boxer, who's the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, also a member of the Commerce Committee, said, and I quote, "I think moving it," referring to my bill, is critical, and moving it fast is critical because I think it will send a message to the international organization we are trying to nudge forward to know that this is the way that this is going to be dealt with, end quote. I could not agree more, Mr. President. In 2005, the European Union began their emissions trading scheme, which attempts to cap emissions of carbon dioxide from stationary sources within the European Union. Starting in 2012, in January of this year, civil aviation operators departing from or landing in Europe began to be included in this emission scheme. Now, under this program, any airline, including non-European airlines flying into and out of Europe, will be required to pay for EU emission allowances. Allowances will be collected for the entirety of the flight, including portions in U.S. and international airspace. Now, just as a great example of this unfair application is happening right now, is we've got Olympic athletes that are traveling to and from the London Games by air. One such Olympian is from my home state of South Dakota, Paige McPherson. She's competing in Taekwondo next week. She arrived in London last week, and the final leg of her flight took her from Newark Airport to Heathrow Airport. During this flight, approximately 555 miles of the 3,500 miles flown, or 16%, were actually in EU airspace. But her flight was taxed as if 100% of it was in EU airspace. Now, obviously, this unilateral imposition of the EU ETS on U.S. aviation operators is arbitrary, it is unfair, and it is a clear violation of international law. Plus, it is being done without any guarantee for environmental improvements and at a huge cost to the aviation industry and constituents that we serve. Now, let me be clear that no one in Congress is against the EU implementing this European trading scheme within their boundaries. That's obviously their prerogative, that's their jurisdiction. However, Mr. President, I believe that any system that includes international and other non-EU airspace must be addressed through the International Civil Aviation Organization, otherwise known as ICAO, of which the United States and 190 countries, including all of the EU member states, are members. And that's why I introduced this simple bipartisan bill. It gives the Secretary of Transportation the authority to take the necessary steps to ensure America's aviation operators are not penalized by any system unilaterally imposed by the European Union. The bill also requires the Secretary of Transportation, the Administrator of the FAA, and other senior U.S. officials to use their authority to conduct international negotiations and take other actions necessary to ensure that U.S. operators are held harmless from the actions of the European Union. It is time for the United States Senate to join the House of Representatives and the administration in voicing our strong opposition to application of the European Union's emission trading scheme system to American operators. I'm sorry that it couldn't be done today, Mr. President, because, as I said, this was unanimously reported out of the Commerce Committee earlier this week. We got broad bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans agree this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and frankly, it's one that I think could be addressed in a very timely way. The longer we wait, the longer that we have American air carriers and therefore American travelers paying into a system that there is no guarantee is going to be used for any kind of environmental improvements in Europe. It's in effect a tax on American travelers that would fund European governments, and if you want to put it in a very crass, plain way, you could say that the American public is being taxed to bail out European Union nations. That's as simply as I can put this. It is a violation of international law, It is a violation of American sovereignty. It is an unfair, unjust, and illegal tax. It needs to be stopped. This legislation would allow that to happen, and it's unfortunate that we've got an objection on the other side that will prevent that from happening here tonight. But I intend to work with my colleagues to try and get a vote on this as soon as we return in September. And I want to thank again my colleague from North Dakota for his graciousness in allowing me to make that statement. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.